Welcome to the Evolution Lab. I'm Matt Roberts, and my mission here is to guide and inspire you to optimize your health, performance, and longevity so that you can live your longest, strongest life as the fittest, healthiest, and most vital version of yourself. My guest today is Simon Gilchrist. Simon is an Australian physiotherapist, completing his Masters of Sports Physiotherapy back in 2005. He's a highly sought-after practitioner with over 25 years clinical experience and heads up the physiotherapy team at Evolution. In this episode, Simon and I discuss the difference between physiotherapists, osteopaths, and chiropractors and how patient demands have changed post-COVID. We talk about the importance of movement literacy, especially in children, and how physiotherapy could be integrated into primary care to reduce healthcare costs. We also cover the impact of stress and posture on health issues, the role of lifestyle in pain management, as well as the extreme cost of back pain on the healthcare system. We touch also on the long-term effects of semaglutide on muscle mass and bone density, and the need for more personalized approaches to address stress management. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Simon Gilchrist. Simon, thanks for joining me today for this episode. This is obviously going to be a lot about how the body functions mechanically. I want to focus a bit today on spinal function and neck positioning. I sit really well in my chair to make sure I'm not going to do anything wrong.
That's great.
But first, before we get to all the technicality behind it, more about you. I want to know more about why you became a physiotherapist.
Yep.
And the background. Tell me why exactly, what happened?
I was a pretty hyperactive kid, played a lot of sport, and...
What were your sports?
I was a track runner. I played Aussie rules football, which I know you hold
we
in
can
high
discuss
regard.
the way that sport works.
But and so was running at a pretty high level, national level, but had quite a few little injuries. Tore my hamstring multiple times, and had some patellofemoral joint issues, and so spent a bit of time at the physio.
Were you a classic sports player who's had the injuries and then ignored them for a bit? Or were you good at that point at going for the help early?
No, Australian culture is very, very different. You injure yourself on a Saturday playing sport, you're in the physio on a Sunday.
Wow.
So
because here you injure yourself, here you're in physio like a year and a half later.
Exactly. So there's a wait and see. It's like, it'll be all right, it'll get better. So it's a very, very different active approach. So I was pretty proactive about it, somewhat obsessive perhaps about it, and spent a lot of time at the physio, and was sort of, loved sport, thought this would be a road into, working in a sports via the human body, and looked at that versus medicine. So the physio was an easier pathway, and opted for that.
Got it. Okay, fine. Well, look, you're respected now as being one of the best physios in the country. So it's gone a long way. I'm sure you will come on to the things you've seen over time, because actually things have evolved on in people's conditions and the reason why it's happening. But to clear one thing up that people do get confused on is, what is a physio compared to an osteo compared to a chiropractor?
Good question. So they sit on a spectrum, I think. So a physiotherapist is someone who will assess and diagnose movement from a relatively holistic approach. So they'll look at structural abnormalities, but they'll very much look at movement function, how the muscle system is working and integrating together. And then they will set up a rehab pathway or rehab program. Use their hands, they'll sometimes manipulate, not all physios, but often manipulate, and then use other tools along with that. And then exercise becomes a big mainframe of that. An osteopath probably sits closest to a physio, and they are often very holistic. They probably do a bit more visceral work, and you've got different types of osteopaths like craniosacral osteopath and all sorts of different other osteos, and they are probably a bit more skeletal based. And so they look at how the skeleton is, the alignment, okay, if there's a pelvic torsion, and they'll do more manipulation and a bit of tissue work. But rehab is not really their cup of tea. And then chiropractors are very skeletal based, very alignment based, and look at things to identify that this is in alignment or out of alignment, and will manipulate, and it's very passive based. Now that's the old school model, but it is changing. And I did a lot of my diagnostic ultrasound through in conjunction with the chiropractic school, and they're doing a lot more rehab. They're doing a lot more of that. So there is quite a difference, but we often use very similar techniques. And so I work with osteos and chiros who are fantastic practitioners.
The person who's torn their hamstring doing whatever, the dad's race at the sports day or something like that, they want to really see a physiotherapist.
Yes. So generally soft tissue injuries, peripheral injuries, you would see a physiotherapist. And I would say spinal injuries from a rehab perspective. But osteopaths and chiros in particular have typically worked more centrally along the spinal system and the axial sort of system. But as a general overview, and this isn't always the case, but do less rehab per se.
Yeah, makes sense. Over your time doing the work that you do,
Yeah.
I know in my sector, I've seen lots of changes in people's demands, where they're at, their lifestyle changes. Are you seeing changes in the reasons why people come to you and your team in the first place?
Yeah.
Because my guess would be that I know in my sector, for example, if you go back 25 years ago, there was a demand for people coming in and saying, well, just lose weight. That was the primary thing.
Yeah.
As time's gone by, it's shifted, and actually that's part of the objective, of course, but mainly it's about actually want to live for longer and be healthier and things. So there's always shifts in demands. Now yours is different. Yours is more reactive. I'm not saying it shouldn't be seen in that way, but often is more reactive.
Yep.
What's the shifting, what people can be saying, I've done this, or I need to do this, or this is my scenario? How's that changed?
Good question. I think there has been a few shifts over the years. I think as we've developed our company and sort of grown that out, so we are one of the bigger brands in London and more well recognised in that we are seeing more people for a preventative approach. So we are
encouraging. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, we're seeing people come in who want to optimize their mechanics, who want to optimize their posture before they're doing an event, or they're just worried that something might be going on, so they want to do everything possible to optimize themselves. Now, so we are seeing more of that. I think pre and post-COVID, I think there was a shift as well in terms of some of the different types of pathologies that we were seeing.
In what ways mainly?
We saw huge numbers post-COVID of frozen shoulders.
Really? You put that down to people's posture, sat at desks,
I think there's a mechanical
lying on a
component
bed.
to that. I think it's a lot of stress. I think stress levels have probably contributed to that. Look, frozen shoulder, adhesive capsulitis, we don't really understand what drives it. It's either post-trauma, post-viral, or there's a little grumpy injury in there, usually bursal irritation, and then that drives a frozen shoulder. I woke up.
It's interesting.
6 weeks into sort of being locked down, and realised I'd had a bit of a grumpy shoulder, and I woke up and was like, oh bloody hell, I've now got a frozen shoulder.
Do you know a good physio at that time?
At that time, I only had myself to work on. We couldn't get outside help or anything like that. But it was an interesting experience.
It's interesting that because it's something which obviously stress has a huge part to play in all of our health, more than we like to really let on recognise. But with that in mind, are you seeing people coming into you who are seeing things or saying they have things going on which are not really going on? I've got a whatever feeling, pain, issue, and
so
you investigate.
We see a lot of spinal things. And so about a quarter of our caseload generally is low back pain, but probably almost half of our caseload is all spinal, neck, thoracic, spinal stuff.
Wow. Massive percentage.
Huge. But we also see a lot of persistent pain. So we see a lot of very complex stuff that gets referred into us. And along with that, we see a lot of health anxiety. And I think health anxiety has massively increased post-COVID. And the type of clients that we're seeing, whether that's because we're busier, whether that's because we're growing, I think we've had lots of discussions with lots of clinicians, and that's patients are a bit more demanding. They're more under stress. COVID was a massive wake-up call for a lot of people in terms of how they interpreted their own health.
But is this a degree of hypochondria or is it real? What's your analysis of that?
There's a whole spectrum. So some of it is the worried well, and yes, there's just them wanting to worry about something, and generally they're well and they're fine, but they want to do everything to just double check that everything is okay. Then there's a whole nother group that are just trying to optimize themselves, and they're a little bit obsessive about it, but not necessarily worriers. But then there's a whole bunch of people who have a degree of pain, but they're so hypervigilant that drives a whole host of issues around that, and that's marked health anxiety. And unless we address the anxiety, we actually struggle to improve the musculoskeletal issues.
Do you notice that going hand in hand with what might appear to be any eating issues as well? Because I imagine someone coming in who's got that over-anxious approach, where we see it, of course,
Yes.
when we're training people, there's often goes hand in hand with a food or a drink or another issue going on. I wonder whether you're seeing that with the patients coming in.
They can have obsessive tendencies. They can have those obsessive personality traits. And so sometimes, yes. Sometimes there's other habits as well that are creeping in with that. But a lot of this doesn't, they're copers, but then a persistent pain issue crops up, and then suddenly that opens a massive can of worms. And it gets very, very tricky to deal with what is a relatively simple mechanical issue sometimes, because they fixate on it, they're hypervigilant on it, and they can't quite see that actually if they just chilled out a little bit about it, things would progress much faster and easier.
Yeah, it's a really tough message, though, isn't it? Because something which actually, the point at which you define, it's fine, it will just go away if you're calm about it or give it some time.
Yeah.
The point at which actually it's a real pain or an issue, defining that crossover point must be incredibly difficult.
Well, that's where pain is fascinating, because we know that pain is a construct of what is happening in our body, yet there's no pain signals. All it is sensory messages, and your computer interprets that whole bit of information. And that is where the computer gets things wrong. It's a survival mechanism, pain. And when we live in a world where we're driven by chronic persistent stress, and we don't go and hibernate in a corner when we've got a little injury, that can then develop into something more persistent. And the computer's not good at dealing with that.
Working it out. Of those people that are getting that persistent pain that comes from that source, you got any feeling for how many of those people are either sleeping badly and telling you that I'm getting 5 hours a night or 4 hours a night? How many are overdoing on alcohol or other substances? Is there a kind of a correlation between those things? It's hard to try and measure, maybe.
Yeah, we probably don't have any hard data on that, but clinically we see a lot of people who have not managed stress levels well and don't sleep well. And that can be pain driven, because they're uncomfortable, so they're not actually getting into that restful sleep state. But it can also just be that stress and anxiety is driving their poorer sleep patterns.
Yeah.
Or their busy lifestyle is meaning that they're just getting 5 or 6 hours rather than the 7 or 8 hours that people should be getting.
Yeah, I know that. I wear a Whoop device that you have as well, and it's something looking at the data on that and giving it to our clients. And when we see people who are stressed, we see patterns within that. Giving you things like great look at HRV scores, going down massively, so that resting heart rate going up, respiration rates going up. We see responses to alcohol, which are shocking in terms of the impacts. We know that if that's happening on a physical level, then the pain thresholds tend to come down if someone's in that state of being tired, being overstressed. Yeah. So therefore the syndrome type feeling must be even more apparent.
Completely. And so, there's so many factors which contribute to pain. And, if your system is heightened in a sensitized state, and that can be a true systemic inflammatory state, it can be a true just centrally sensitized state. So someone who is just a little bit more on edge, that can be driven from anxiety. It can be a whole host of things.
So part of your work shifted from being hands-on to being almost not counsellor, but there's an element of that mental therapy within the physical work to understand, so we're trying to bring it back off the edge. 100%.
Like, the best clinicians are very good psychologists. And I think across the board, PTs, coaches, they need to be able to interpret that clients and help to coach them through changes that they need to make. But sometimes there's quite difficult conversations that you need to have with people, and suggesting and opening up other pathways that they might need to address first, because we're bashing our head against a brick wall unless we address this component with them.
Looking at what's going on physically with people, I mean, it's interesting and obvious when you go onto, anyone sits on a tube, a train, waits anywhere, and everyone's basically here. I mean, there must be now huge amounts of increases in neck issues that you're dealing with. In fact, I put some numbers out in terms of cost to the country, and in terms of timings. This podcast comes a day after a budget which has increased taxes enormously, and it's funding the NHS.
It's wonderful when running a company.
Even more again, so we'll come back to that. But the stark numbers of this actually from the King's Fund information in 2020 are that the NHS dealing with primary back care only. So this is when someone goes to their doctor, has a consultation with them for 10 minutes, is given some painkillers at overinflated prices, and then goes away. That costs 3.5 billion per year, that alone. If you then added in the primary and secondary care, which then includes some of the NHS provided physio work and follow-ups,
imagery, and
all of those things, 35 billion per year.
Yeah.
In context, in 1999, NHS bill overall for the whole NHS was about 39 billion.
Yeah.
So now we've got back care costing almost the same as it cost to run the whole NHS 25 years ago. And this clearly can't be a good thing.
Yeah.
So this is not even fixing. I mean, the primary care is not even fixing. It's just putting a sticking plaster.
Yeah, most of the time, definitely.
Going along, here's painkillers, go away. Hopefully it goes away and then doesn't go away. So we're really missing a trick here in terms of how we get to people, manage it, encourage people to understand what's going on within their system. What do we do? What's in the short term? What's the answer? Is there an answer? Is there a long-term answer to try and batter down number 10's door? Tough right now to do and make a difference and a change. What do you think?
Look, it's a fascinating area because I think it's a massive cost to society. It's a massive cost to the government. I think even if you think about those numbers, and then work days lost. The amount of work days, sick days lost to back pain. When, and I don't know this figure, but probably close to 90% of that is simple mechanical back pain. There's probably 10% of, some cancers or things that give you back pain that are very significant and need appropriate treatment very quickly. But so much of that is down to, people being unfit, not strong enough to sit, not being stable enough to actually move effectively. Your motor morons who just can't move very well. And lack that movement literacy. And so,
would you have a feel for, in terms of population as a whole, that group of people, what do you reckon percentage-wise that might ballpark represent? Those that have the complete lack of functional capability to the degree where it is causing back pain or will cause back pain. We'll come back to the neck pain with mobile phones in a second.
I would say somewhere from 0 to a third. So a reasonable chunk of the population. And we're seeing, we see people from 4 years of age to 100. 102 was our oldest client. And we're seeing young kids who are so weak, poor movers these days that we just shouldn't be seeing. 25 years ago, we weren't seeing these types of children because there was more movement literacy in schools. There was more about developing physical capacity and physical strength. And this feeds into their whole lifestyle, them enjoying exercise, them being fit and strong to be able to sustain sitting. Because if you look at what sitting is, well, we're hunter-gatherers. Our spine is not designed to sit. So unless you're pretty strong, you've got to have that necessary support to help to support it.
So would you say then there's a case here to actually go into the schools program and start at that point and work on literacy, physical literacy within that setting to understand how to try and move better and work better?
100%. I think you need a multi-pronged approach. I think if you're looking at long term, I think that's one area that you need to address. You need to address the movement literacy issue that is happening in schools. You've got hypermobile kids. You've got people who don't enjoy sport. You've got the gamers with social media being so accessible. You know, I didn't grow up with a mobile phone. Probably you didn't either. And, you know, it was only, I got my phone when I was 18 or 19 or something like that. And so I wasn't on this. I was outside playing football, cricket, tennis, running around. But that built strength. And so that's one part of it. But I think the NHS needs to look at decentralising some of their primary care, and you have some tertiary centres whereby there's a physio that takes all the initial sort of back stuff. In some centres, that's being done. But
so as a step in then, as kind of your, you know, on the soapbox rant to the government, what would you say you could do this right now to make a difference to ensuring that you can get that care? Is there one obvious thing you could do?
Yeah, one obvious thing. I think it's having more. You've got to educate. You've got to educate people that they need to be moving and exercising at a simple level. So that's one branch of that. But I think you would probably want to have install in every single NHS practice a physio to assess and screen MSK stuff, to build programs, and that would reduce your cost immedially. You know, most physios are not linked directly into the GP. They come sort of tertiary post referral, but they should be leading on this rather than the GP. The GP has 8 to 10 minutes. They don't have time to completely assess this and don't have the skill set either. So that would be a big change that I think would ultimately drive down those costs.
Yeah, well, if you actually drill down the cost funny enough, I think the cost per GP per 8-minute session is something about £48, somewhere there. For a nurse, it's about, I think the 15 minutes is around £19, £20, £25. Mm-hmm. These are prices which actually compared to what it could be for having physios on site to deal with what are, you know, 40, 50, 60% of their cases coming through.
Exactly.
It's a huge cost saving across the spectrum. And given that it's a £35 billion a year cost to the NHS, if you took 10% of that away, well, there's what 1p in national insurance change in the tax situation. So this kind of very straightforward. I ran a program about 10 years ago in about 10 schools, primary schools, where we introduced every day just 15, 20 minutes of exercise. Mm-hmm. A great guy, Chris Sharman, who specializes in this whole area with kids' fitness. We had 2 classes per school doing the program over a 9-week period. And over that time, there were 0 negative outcomes. We tested at the start for their fitness levels, doing various movement patterns, things you said just now about, you know, when you're a child, you go and climb a tree and kick a ball, and because that's all you had to do. Doing the same kind of tests for them, how to move, jump, run, walk, and then test them again 9 weeks later for just that 15-ish minutes per day. And they had up to about a 30-40% increase in their capability in various tests as a high point. Some had a neutral response. The average was about a 25% increase in just 9 weeks of work at a cost of, compared to the £384 per year cost to primary care for back problems, £18.50 per child per year to run the program. And the reason why we didn't carry on with it was that the schools themselves, the teachers didn't feel fit enough to do the work.
Yeah.
So you got this whole structural problem of they couldn't implement even with a small amount of time because they felt out of condition as well in doing the thing. So there's a whole range of issues to attack on it. And each one of those cases causes that cost of £384 per person for the care on primary care at some point in time in half population. It's a nuts situation.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've built and designed an app that screens children, that you can digitize a lot of this, and it identifies the ones who have issues and gives them a base program that they can go home and work with.
If someone wants to get the app, what's it called? Where can they get it?
It's in beta test mode at the moment.
Okay, but coming soon. So that's great. That's a great market for that stuff.
But that's the sort of need that, you know, you need to make it cost effective and accessible for kids, for parents, so that they can guide because it's actually got to be led by the parents.
Yeah, certainly.
If
you lead by example, all these things, that question.
Yeah.
So if someone is, let's say, go back to the back care point, because this is one of the key issues in terms of what we're confronting with everybody right now. what people can do to try to look at what the back problems might be. There must be some simple things they can do to say this is a short-term ache or it's a long-term problem.
Yep.
What are maybe a few things they can do to try to ensure that they are doing the right thing? Maybe we start actually with, because it's quite topical right now, work from home.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's at their desk
Yep.
and they're sat there listening to this right now thinking, oh, I need to think about what I'm doing. How am I sitting? What are the key things sat at a desk we should think about to ensure their spine's in the right position?
Yeah, okay, so working from home, most people are on a laptop, okay? Immediately, that's not good, okay? Because the laptop, the screen is only here, so you really cannot be looking down particularly well. And you know, you've got to work very, very hard to maintain that spinal alignment. I think you need a reasonable setup. So if you're looking at working on a desk at home, you need to have your, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to move here, but
you can move.
But you need to have your desk front on. Okay, so this desk is too high for me. My elbows should be at 90 degrees here. So I'm likely to end up doing that and then looking down here. So in a perfect world, if you're working from home, you want to have your elbows at 90 degrees. You want to have your hands and wrists supported. You want to have a screen which is at least level with your eyes, if not a little bit higher. And so that probably rules out a laptop. So you either need a secondary screen or you need a PC. And then you need to bloody move. Now, there's a whole bunch of evidence that actually, you know, there's not an ideal sitting posture for everyone. Everyone is different in terms of what's ideal for them. But you sit on your backside all day, you're going to get some pain. Is that your low back? Is that your neck? Is that your hips? Because you're compressing your hips, leading to a bit of impingement. So the best thing to try and do is to make sure that every 30 to 40 minutes, you are just getting up and moving. You're pumping some blood into the system and you're moving. Yes, in a perfect world, we want to sit relatively upright with relatively nice posture so that we're not stuck in these sort of passively sort of stretched positions for the spine. But, you know, moving, twisting, just making sure that you're not in one position for a prolonged period of time is what the body needs.
Is there a benefit to having some sort of triggers? So you might have on your desk maybe a reminder or a sticker on your screen to just look at the red dot and say, oh yeah, point to self, sit back upright again.
I think everyone works differently for that. I think sometimes we just set alarms on our phones so that every 40 minutes you know that you just need to move, you need to get up. If you need that prompt. Yeah, sometimes we've used a red dot. In some people, we've actually got these postural devices that you can wear. One's a little brooch that you can put on your...
Yeah, I've seen this, yeah.
And as soon as it detects that you're slouching, it just vibrates. So it's just that little prompt. And so different people need different cues. Sometimes we try and, when we're building an exercise program, we'll actually try and just get them to see and map that into their lunch break so that they're just going in and breaking up that pattern that they might be sort of using. So I think thinking about the individual, and there's lots of sort of different cues that you can do, and you just need to bias it to that particular person.
Are you seeing with those people that are sat at the desk a lot, obvious changes in posterior chain strength? And we see it for sure, without question. Things like, you know, doing a squat test compared to a deadlift test. The deadlift is, in ratio terms, significantly weaker and haven't got that ability to engage the glutes mainly, lower back as well, but the glutes are kind of a real missing link there. They're sat in it for so long, it kind of seems to disappear. And we're seeing that, you must have seen that a lot in terms of the reason why those hip issues are happening and lower back issues are happening.
Completely. So posterior chain weakness is a big area. Even just extensibility of the posterior chain is often a big issue. So glutes switching off because they're just not being used and activated. And glutes, posterior glutes and lateral glutes being incredibly weak, which is a massive, massive area. And so all of that needs big amounts of work and actually generally big amounts of load to actually drive change.
So with that in mind then, in terms of the numbers behind that, so if we drill down into really, if someone's thinking about actually, my butt might be a bit weak or lower back, what's the sort of, from your perspective, what's the amount of loading, the number of reps in relation to that loading, there were sets to get done, times per week to do that, what's the frequency, what's the load, in rough terms?
Okay, so I talk a lot about 5-3-8, 5 exercise sessions a week. 3 need to be strength, relatively good strength, and 8 is 8,000 steps a day, roughly. So within that 5, you need some cardio, but you also need minimum 2 core sessions. So that's where you get the 5 exercise sessions a week from. Now, you need to ensure that you're doing core, which is good core strength, and that needs to be strength endurance based, the core stuff. And then the strength work, posterior chain work, leg work, arm work needs to be at a higher sort of load range, so that you're pushing less reps but more load, and you're bringing about more change that way. So
again, going back to, because people listening, I think sometimes misunderstand the quantities on this. So as a percentage of body weight, if someone's doing a loaded, let's say they're doing a front squat or back squat, that kind of thing. So a bar on the chest, or a bar on the back. If someone weighs 80 kg as a guy, 60 kg as a female, what are we talking about in terms of the ideals of loading on that?
Look, that's probably more your perfect domain, but I want people to be pushing their body weight easily.
Right. Yeah, it's a big number, isn't it? It's a thing.
Completely.
And people often go into a gym, and we see it all the time, and they are assuming it's a heavy loading to have maybe a 20 kg weight.
Yeah.
When actually it's this tiny percentage, and you shift your body weight. That's the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. And look, if you talk about muscle mass, sarcopenia, or sort of bone density issues, the stats suggest to stimulate appropriate change, you need appropriate load. Now, for bone loading, you need multiples of your body weight, and to build strength. Okay, and when we get someone who hasn't moved weight and hasn't exercised before, okay, it probably doesn't take much to actually fatigue them to generate change. But actually, we want to develop that movement capacity in them so that they can tolerate that sort of load ultimately. But okay, that's got to be started safely with good movement education, and
build the basics up, and then go from there. Because the whole point as well with, the bone density in mind in particular. We in our club down in Knightsbridge, we have a bone scanning machine, and we have a bone building machine as well, the biodensity machine, and we're going to cover that actually in a separate episode in its entirety. But it's quite significant, isn't it, in terms of the loading that machine provides and needs to provide to create bone density is high. Just talk me through the loading in this 5-second period.
So there's 4 movement patterns for that machine, which is the biodensity machine.
So those haven't seen this machine. Basically, it's like sitting in a leg press type looking machine.
Correct.
You do 4 exercises.
Correct.
It loads you like crazy for this short period of 5 seconds per area.
Yep. So it's high force over that 5-second period. It's an isometric load into the system. You're put in an optimally safe position where you can maximally generate force. Now, the 4 movements are like a leg press, like a dead lift type position, or a carry, a chest press, and then a core pull. Now, if we're talking leg press, for example, then we're talking 5 to 6 times multiples in force through the hip and through the spine. Okay, and so that's where you're getting marked osteogenic loading into the system. So we're talking about something that, I weigh around 80 kilos. I'm pushing 700 odd, 700 to 800 odd pounds on that leg press machine.
Cumulatively over that 5-second period. It's a vast load up.
And so, you convert that to kilos, that's, 4 to 5 times multiples at least. And so this is the sort of loading that you need to generate that good change within the bone. And then obviously strength gains beyond that. So you need a lot of load to actually build an optimal body and to maintain strength. Because as we know, if you're trying to optimize yourself from a pretty early age, you start losing muscle mass and you start losing bone mass even from sort of late 30s, 40s onwards. And these are massive issues that we have to deal with in society.
But 2 things in response to that I would want to dive into deeper. One is the hormonal change females go through the menopause.
Yep.
One doesn't exist according to the hormone specialists, but the andropause as well for guys. But the change in testosterone levels for sure over time has an impact. Yep. And the third thing actually within that sequence actually is we should talk about Ozempic, Wegovy, Manjaro, or the semaglutide medications taken for weight loss right now, and the impact that has with a sarcopenia impact in mind. Let's go first of all through the females and menopausal changes, changes in muscle structure and mass, and how that impacts on both fat strength, but also the bone structures as well.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating area, and we're seeing, we see a raft of sort of tendon pathologies, lower limb tendon pathologies, and glute tendinopathy. We just reviewed a latest article. We're trying to change the nomenclature from GTPS, which is greater trochanteric pain syndrome, because that's a generic umbrella term for lateral hip pain, to shift it back towards glute tendinopathy, because these tendons are hit in middle-aged women at a higher rate. About 23% of people will have lateral hip tendon issues within their lifetime. So the prevalence is pretty high. And we see clinically that there's a much higher prevalence in that post-menopausal female. And we know that tendons are estrogen-loving creatures. So when someone's estrogen levels are dropping, going through menopause, we actually know clinically that people will do better when they're on an estrogen HRT package, and that improves things. So what we want to try to do is to optimize them, but their hormone imbalance definitely gets in the way at times.
Yeah, because it's a phase, of course, where women go through this phase in their life, and they got the combined effects of the menopause symptoms themselves, which make them feel less like being active. And then that lack of being active means the muscle starts to waste. Then you have this impingement, the issues with the tendinopathies and so on as well. So it's all kind of going on all at once. So for someone going into that and hitting perimenopause, what would you say is the key things you just have to now do this? Is it just strengthening, pure strength work?
Yeah, strength is definitely a very, very big component of that, but it's being stable. So it's functional strength for me. When we're looking at rehabbing anyone or layering or improving movement patterns, it's movement pattern work, it's motor control movement pattern work, endurance, and that's strength, endurance, and then it's strength. Because if we don't layer it down like that, we tend to break people.
You're creating other issues along the line.
And so for me, when we're looking at anyone who's coming into that time frame where they might be reaching menopause, then making sure that they are exercising. Strength work is probably more important than cardio most of the time. For most of these people. But making sure that they're doing that core work around that. Now, depending on their body type, mobility is also imperative for the spine. So you have those stiff body types, and typically when we look at males versus females, about 20-25% of females are hypermobile, and about 15% of males, we think, are hypermobile. So males need more mobility than females typically, and yoga and Pilates could be much better for those guys, yet who do we see going to yoga and Pilates?
Well, that's the irony, isn't it? Where, exactly. It's something which, of course, guys want to go and pump some weights. And there's good virtue for doing that as well, to make sure we retain hormone levels and make sure the muscle mass stays there. But power is nothing without control.
Exactly.
So you've got to have that base that's there, have that mobility. And all the best footballers now are using Pilates alongside all the other work they're doing to make sure you've got that stability, that control, that movement. So it's the blend always of all of it without question. Females then going through perimenopause into menopause and beyond, the same thing applies, doesn't it? It's where it's continuous strengthening. In fact, if anything, it gets more important as time goes by. With the men, and there's going to be a drop-off, sadly, in testosterone from the age of about 35 onwards. It does kind of fall away, unless you work on it. And mine's very good, thanks. Very good. I'm very proud of that fact. In fact, what's disturbing too, I checked in Nikki Kay recently, our hormone specialist, and what's disturbing about hormones is that generation is dropping. So, yours and mine are probably a little less than our dads were. Our sons, sadly, are less than ours. There's a whole range of things, reasons why that's happening. But for everyone, it's about how do we then make sure we maintain it,
Yep.
for us. How do you make sure your children are doing the right things for them? And it's really interesting. I think part of it comes down to your original point about kids. You and I grew up in the era of, you get outside and you ride the bike, you jump off, whatever. You're just out there being active.
Exactly.
And I think it gives you that point of driving the hormones. And now we're missing that, whether it's in our age category or guys in their 20s, certainly guys in 20s, 30s, aren't doing as much as a population, as much hardcore sport. It's not so intensive in the same way. They might go to the gym for a bit, but that's all they're doing, rather than the broader spectrum of things. No one ran track in the same way as we did back in those days. Now they don't do the same frequency. There's nothing else to do then. So now there is. So that's an issue. But for guys, they've got to be focusing on, haven't they, maintaining that muscle mass.
Yes.
Weirdly, probably less important than for females.
To a degree. I think, they drop off as well, but females can drop off much faster.
Yeah, exactly.
And the hormonal changes are more profound. So, males definitely need to drive strength, need to drive stability, need to drive movement as well. That mobility in the spine, to avert that thoracic stiffness. Because if your thoracic spine is stiff, then it leads to neck stuff, it leads to lower back stuff. But the same principles apply in that, okay, everyone needs the strength work, and it's more important as we all age. Women need significantly more specific programs a lot of the time than the males. But cardio becomes a little less important in some of the females compared if we're comparing.
Yeah.
But sometimes, the males sometimes need to do that little bit more cardio a lot of the time.
For sure.
As well, because we need to challenge that VO2. We need to build your base sort of zones, base 2 sort of zones as well. So it's a really interesting field. And then when we're dipping that aspect into physical treatments, we have to have that awareness of where they're at within their sort of hormone cycles. Are they, going through that male menopause, and are we seeing more tendon injuries? Are we seeing they're just not responding and recovering as we think they should do? And that's where we might look at investigating them further.
Which goes hand in hand with your point earlier around the whole thing about whether stress is driving some of this stuff, and guys who drink too much or do too little because they're too stressed out or sleep too little. There's no way they can keep up with their hormone development, whether that's on cortisol front, whether it's testosterone front. It's just not going to happen in any way, shape or form. Going back to the point about semaglutides. So with that, are you seeing people coming in who've been taking it? I suspect more women than men that you're seeing perhaps with issues, but could be both, I'm not quite sure, with real loss of muscle mass as a result. Because the data about this is that potentially with things like Ozempic and Wegovy, as much as 40, 50% of what you lose in weight is muscle mass.
We are definitely seeing a quite a large cohort of clients coming in who have been taking it, because it's sort of jaw dropping when they walk through the door and we're like, oh wow,
you're half the man you used to be. You're looking well.
You look different. Okay, so you've lost some weight. And a lot of this is muscle mass. And I think we're setting ourselves up for an issue in 5+ years whereby there's going to be a lot of people who have sarcopenia, who probably then have bone density issues as well, because they haven't done all the movement associated with this. And I think we're not educating people that they need to be doing strength work to combat this muscle mass, because when you're taking any of those injectables, they don't selectively go, all right, we're just going to pull just the fat off here and none of the muscle, because you're just losing mass. And that's a big issue. And I don't know that we know the exact figures, but 30+%, and that's frightening. That we've got a lot of people running out there, and there's a lot of people who perhaps don't need to be taking it.
Well, that's probably the greater issue, is that those that are taking it on that kind of let's just drop half a stone, in reality don't really need to lose that either. And the loss then becomes, I think, even more stark with the muscle mass being a thing that goes from them. That's all they've got to lose. And they wonder why they're tired, or they're suffering with a bad back or a bad hip, because there's just no structural control in there anymore. And we know from working with clients that those that come to us, and a lot come to us saying want to take it, or they're taking it. And we'll say, well, we'll help you with this for sure, but you have to be doing heavy loading. We're going to come off
yep.
the cardio a bit, and the protein's got to be higher in the intake.
Completely.
And that's all we can try and do and manage it. But from your point of view, treating people, there must be this, pretty good for business, a surge in injuries off the back of people taking this stuff.
It's also the energy deficit that I think it drives.
Yeah.
Because you are setting up a system whereby they just don't want to bloody eat, or they can't eat.
Quite.
And, their dietary, their calorie input naturally drops. Okay, so unless they're really, really specific and upping their protein intake, they're just going to be in a deficit. Now, the deficits that we're seeing in terms of calorie deficit, we see that in athletes, we see that in runners, we see that in females who have eating issues. But actually, we're seeing it in a lot of ordinary people now who actually, they're not healing. They've got bone metabolism issues because of this energy deficit. The first thing, it's a survival mechanism. The first thing that gets dropped out of the system is, laying down new tissue, regenerating tissue. All of that healing process stops because the body just gets wrapped into a survival mode.
So whilst there's a potential benefit of being anti-inflammatory via having less intake, the negatives against it outweigh it after a fairly short period of time.
It's all about this balance.
Yeah.
And yes, okay, amazingly positive drug in terms of weight loss, reducing diabetes, obesity.
Well, the on-label stuff is good, but the off-label maybe is not.
But I think we're going to see a whole host of issues with it down the line if it's not well managed, if we're not educating people that they need to be doing specific strength work, they need to be upping their protein intake, and so it's an interesting area because there's a lot of GPs now actually who are going, I'm not prescribing it.
Is that happening now?
Yeah, we're sending you to an endocrinologist. This needs to be
thing.
very well managed under the endocrinologist.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing issues and actually it's a waste of our time.
Interesting.
Because we'd probably be doling it out to 50% of our
the health
clients.
minister, Wes Streeting's idea of trying to put this out to everybody on a broad base to get them back into the workplace again, with probably saying resoundingly the same bad idea.
There needs to be wrapped up medically in this. Okay, yes, if you are obese and cannot lose that weight, great. Okay, if you're diabetic, amazing. But actually for the worry well, or the ones who are off work, I'm not sure why they're off work, not sure that's the complete answer.
Simon, thank you for your time. A lot covered off there. It's great. People can find you at Mayfair Health, and you're in the clubs with me as well, and do some great work, and your team's amazing as well. So people can go to your site, find you there to try and book to see you on a whole raft of different treatments and ailments to be cured and so on. Thank you again.
Excellent. Terrific. Nice to be here, and very, very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you for joining us today in the Evolution Lab. I hope you're able to take some great information and inspiration from our discussion. And while we love creating motivational and moving content for you, what I'd love for you to do now is take from today's episode what felt most relevant to you and apply it. And if you need help with that, or simply want to let me know what you thought of the show, please do reach out. You can connect with me and my team on social media simply by searching for my name or the handles at Matt Roberts Evolution or at Matt Roberts PT. Alternatively, head to my website, mattroberts.co.uk, where you can find out about the work we're doing at Evolution and get even more info about the show. If you found this episode valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you can take a moment to subscribe and let us know what you think about the show. Your support means we can reach even more people, change more lives, and reach even higher highs. Thank you so much again for taking the time to tune in today. Until next time, I'm Matt Roberts, and this has been the Evolution Lab.